So here's another quick and fun exercise, something that I created with the 3D designer, of course, but also with a texture that started as a starry sky, the star or night sky. So let's see how to do that. This animation all together from scratch with the 3D designer. Alright, so initially I created this image. Right, and in fact, let's go and free that animation we currently have. Where is that? Right here, free the animation. And let's see how we created this texture. So that was done with filter, render, starfield. Now when you render a starfield, you have some options here for the star size. You can make them bigger, smaller, distribution, kind of how many there are, and also the brightness of them. So you can give them a little bit more of a bluish tint, and there's some variations between them, so they're not all the same. But let's say we get something like this one here, which is different from what I had earlier, but why not try that. And I'm going to store that image quick, just in case I want to get back to it. Alright, so now if we look at this image, let me zoom in a little bit here. There's mostly very dark background and then a couple of bright areas. And if you think about this as a elevation map, just like we did for terrains, this is going to be mostly flat bottom, the dark part, and then a couple of bright spots that are peeking out really high. And if you turn it around, it might look like a cavern, and something like oh, I don't know, like stalactites and stalagmites if you flip it upside down, also if you use the mirror function. So one thing we'll do is let's get first into the 3D 3D designer, and there you go. So let's go and look at this a little bit from different angles, maybe zoom out. We've got the fog set up here. Let's go and reset things a little bit so we can work from initial default parameters. Okay, I'm going to move this here a little bit and then move into the cavern and go sideways. And so you see a lot of these spokes going down, and I need to make them a little bit brighter. There you go. That's much better. Alright, now you can also change the depth of that extrusion, the size or the amplitude. And keep in mind that as you move it around, you may not see them all. The thin ones you won't see because it's switching to a lower resolution while you're dynamically updating them, and then it shows you the full resolution when you're done. Now one thing that you might want to do also is the pre-filter. That's one of the options down here. That's one of the new features in 3D Designer. The pre-filter will, if you leave it at 0, you will see a lot of detail. But that might give you some scintillation or a little bit of flickering during an animation. In a static view it's fine, and it's actually great because you get more detail. But during animation, if you want to move through this, you might actually sometimes prefer to wash this out a little bit, to pre-filter it. So if you go carefully there, you might get something like this. Another thing that I like to use is the fog level, so that you don't see all the way to the very end of the cave until you actually get in there. We're going to fly through that, right? And so we're going to start from the back. You can see that this is all turned around. I mean, you could look at it this way too, upside down, but I'm going to take it from the top down so that we can then also, let's give it about this angle. We can then also enable the mirror, right up here where it says mirror. Let's click on Y, so we also have it vertical axis along the Y axis, and we can take this Y here for the move and move it down a little bit, something like so. And then we're basically ready to do an animation of this. So perhaps one more, which is the ground fog. We can enable that. By default it's off. It was actually enabled already. Let's go back and enable it and see if we can get some nice additional shading effects there that way. And like I said, also the fog level in the background. So then that way it's kind of mysterious because you don't see the background all the way here. So you can make it go dark, and only as you fly in will you start seeing it when you get closer to it. right? So it will reveal further down what's in the cave there. And let's see if maybe we can get an interesting vantage point. Let's use this one. All right, let's move back a little bit as far as we can without seeing the edge of the cave. And I think at this point that's the angle that we'll start from. So let's go cancel that. We're back at our starfield, but now we'll go and create an animation. So we'll allocate the space needed for that, the number of frames. Let's create this animation. Let's give it about 333, and go. And now we go to the timeline, right? Or you can do that from the animation menu right there. And the timeline, we will use the filter. That's 1, 2, 3 down, and it's the 3D designer right here. It's going to remember the parameters we just had. It's going to use them again. And this time we don't need to move anything or change anything. We pretty much are ready to use those parameters as is. Perhaps anti-aliasing we could do to make it a little bit better quality at the end, but it's going to take more time. So if you have a slow system, try first with anti-aliasing off, and if the result is still a little bit flickering or a little bit of noisy, you might want to enable the AA level. Let's go and OK that though, and then what you see here in the preview, at this point it doesn't actually show the mirror, just the original. But all I need to do now is to use the Z axis here to translate, to move it along the Z. Right, you can see that in the preview. So what I'll do is I'll move it all the way to the end here, maybe about this much, so we just see at the top it being cut off a little bit, and we'll set a keyframe here. Add a keyframe. So that'll be the keyframe on the left side. In fact, I'm going to scale this up a little bit so we get more granularity. There's 300 or so frames along this timeline, so a lot of them are already squished together. I'm going to go to the very last if I can, and then just move this further in all the way to the very last. Looks like we're going to break through one of them here, but that's okay. Let's go just about this much, and set another keyframe. Where is it? Right there. So now you see some parameters moving. It's actually not indicating that too much, but we can go perhaps keep it linear or spline interpolated for these positions. Maybe somewhere in between we'd like to also go up a little bit, so we could change the y-axis. Yeah. Gotta be careful though not to go too far, because that means the bottom is also gonna go low, and it's gonna be just and same likewise, if we go too low we might actually break through the ceiling, right? So we want to stay there, but this might add a nice little interesting additional little twist to that animation. Let's move it sideways as well. That's the x-axis. There you go. Let's go there and keyframe that. So now we have the positions moving a little bit as we preview it here. Move it a little bit left and right, and we can see now we'll no longer break through this long stalactite there. And let's go. Now if you're not quite sure if this is really going to produce the result you want or you like, one thing you could do is to save undos, so that after you've done it and you can look at it, if you don't like it, you can just undo that. Right? So you will be able to click undo. If you don't save the undos like this, it doesn't give you a scenario to go back to. It doesn't keep the original images, it just modifies them, it applies the filter, and you're stuck with the new one, with the new animation series. So go about this very carefully. It's a little bit faster if you don't save them and it doesn't take disk space, but it's going to mean that if you do it wrong, you're gonna have to kind of start from scratch from the beginning or a little bit earlier again. But that's okay. I think I'm going to be good here, and I'll just click apply and render that. So we have 300 frames now being rendered pretty quickly here. We didn't enable anti-aliasing. And I am on something like an i7 quad core with hyperthreading that gives me 8 cores, 8 logical cores, and it's a second generation i7, so it's not the very fastest, latest and greatest, but still pretty good. And I got 16 gigabytes of RAM. Not that I'm using it. I mean, this is a 32-bit application, so it's not going to use that much anyway. But I think I'm done here. I got the animation, and yep, I can scrub through that. So now one thing you see is that the fog is indeed the distant fog, hiding the dark parts back here. You don't see them yet until you actually fly and you get close enough. There you go. So let's go and play this. Let's play it here at 30 frames a second. Click that, and then go play. Oh, and I got a little bit of flicker going on here. So now that might be because perhaps we didn't have the mirroring happening on all of these frames. So what's happening, and that's because it may not render that during the animated side. So we need to apply that. The mirror is still enabled, the vertical mirror. So what it will do is now if we scrub through that, it applies it on the fly. Right? So more and more we'll have them all covered. But to really be sure that all of them are covered and there's no more flicker when we just do the playback like that, what we'll want to do is go to the filter and animate it, and then force the apply mirror. Right? That will actually go through the entire frame sequence and force the mirror to be rendered on it. So it's a little bit slower than the actual playback, but it's intentionally doing that to actually play it. So now when you play it, you don't have any flicker anymore because you don't have any part frames that are not mirrored yet. And that means you can actually go and disable the mirror, disable the vertical mirror, or go clear here. If you had multiple checkboxes enabled here, you can clear. So you no longer have the mirror enabled, and now you have this animation just as intended. And so, I mean, the thing which is fun about this is that it started from a starfield. Right? Remember what we used to create these spikes and stalactites and stalagmites? It's a starfield. I have a saved copy here. This is the one actually we used here. That's the starfield from where we started for this particular one. Right, and so that's just another idea or something fun to experiment with and to try with PD Pro. This one version 8.2.